Welcome, everyone in the United States, Canada, and around the world to another episode of It's a Wrap with Rap, the podcast of overcomers and useful information to better our daily lives and mental spirit. I am your host, Ron Rapaport. I would like to take a moment to thank all of our listeners, viewers, supporters, and sponsors for helping to make this podcast such a success. The podcast is being heard on all major platforms and the podcast website, itsawrapwithrap.com, where you can find all the episodes, previews of future episodes, and great products and services offered from our sponsors. The podcast can also be viewed on our YouTube channel, It's a Wrap with Rap, the podcast uncut. My guest today is Danny Covey from Embrun, Ontario, Canada. Danny is the author of Scar Tissue, his memoir of hope and the perseverance in hardships. He is also a creative Renaissance man who fills his time as a graphic designer, illustrator, marketer, art instructor, and a video producer. Despite having a good sense of humor, things have not always been easy for Danny. Danny has faced many trials throughout his life. Danny has survived 8 heart operations, 4 of which were open heart surgeries, which have left pronounced physical and psychological scar tissue on his body and in his mind. He nearly died on the operating table 3 times and was repeatedly told that he would never be able to excel physically. Danny is with us today to tell his miracle story, a story he is thankful to be able to share today and inspire us not to be the victim of our circumstances, but the victor of our story. Welcome, Danny, to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on, Ron. It's very good to be here.
Okay, it's great to have you. Let's start at the beginning. Can you tell us about your family dynamics, growing up and, your schooling and that?
Absolutely. I like to say it this way. I was not the kid on the playground that got picked last for team sports. I was the kid that wasn't even on the field. I was the kid that stayed back in class because from a very young age, I could never participate in sports. I joke that I never knew my gym teacher, but I heard he was a really nice guy.
Wow. Now I know starting at age 10 and a half months old, going up to age 8, you were having issues. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so it's my story really starts with my parents. And I started just probably 8, 9 months old, and I just started going unconscious and flopping over. And the first time this happened, my parents rushed me to the hospital. I was revived. They weren't sure what had happened. Maybe I had choked on something. But this pattern repeated itself, and it happened again and again and again. And my parents took me to different specialists, to different cardiologists. I had seen 10 different doctors.
Wow.
And the 11th one put his stethoscope in his ears and he listened to my chest. And at 11 months old, he said, "Your son has a trill and there's something wrong with his heart." So I had a heart catheterization at 11 months old, and it was determined that I had severe problems with my aortic valve and with my mitral valve. And at that point, it was an emergency flight across the country to Sick Kids Hospital in Toronto, Ontario, where at 18 months old, I had my first open heart surgery.
And I understand at 1.5 years old, you only weighed 14 pounds.
Yeah, I had actually lost weight as I was. And the surgery was at the time, this would have been 1978. The surgery was experimental. So the surgeons didn't even really want to talk about my odds of survival. They were just going to do the surgery and, hope beyond hope that somehow it would work. And I don't want to spoil it for your viewers and listeners, but I made it.
Well, we are so thankful you did. And in 1978, in April, that was your first open heart surgery, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So things continue, shall we say, normally, normally after that period.
Mm-hmm.
And at age 8, you travel from, I might be mispronouncing it. Is it Regina?
Regina, Saskatchewan. Yes.
Right. You
Yeah.
travel from there to Saskatoon
Hmm.
for a routine catheterization prior to your expected growth spurt. Can you tell us about that time?
Yeah, so it was life was kind of humming along. My childhood was going great. I call it my Hasbro childhood because life was fairly normal for several years. I had this catheterization more as a preventative measure. The doctors and cardiologists thought it would be a good idea just to have my heart checked out. And when my parents entered the room after the procedure, one look at the doctor and they knew something was wrong. And what that catheterization, that routine catheterization had discovered was that my aortic valve was constricting and it was blocked. And that at 8 years old, I would be needing another open heart surgery.
Wow. Okay. That's a lot to go through. Can you tell us the effects of a sick child, what the effects are on the families?
Yeah, I wrote about it quite a bit, and there's some I left out, but I think the statistics for parents that have children with severe health issues, there's almost a 90% divorce rate among the parents.
That's astounding. A
It is.
90%?
It's yeah, it was very difficult. And with my siblings, because I had health issues,
Yeah.
I got special treatment. I was not I didn't get in trouble as much as they did. And definitely there was friction between my older brothers and I because, Danny, the youngest brother, could do no wrong. And then when he did, he never got in trouble for it. So there was definitely friction. As a parent now, I see it differently. My parents really were in crisis, and you know they were just glad that I was there and trying their best to get through what was a very difficult and dark season. I will just say this: between 1985 and 1990, I had 5 heart surgeries in 5 years. So that was a very challenging time for our family.
Yeah, that's a lot, obviously. How does an 8-year-old grapple with looking death squarely in the face? Tell us about your belief system.
This was a so I grew up with scars on my body,
Right.
and I had no memory of how they got there. I was told how they got there, or I heard the stories that a parent might tell a 6-year-old, "Hey, this is how you got these scars." But Ron, no doubt about it, when I was 8 and I was facing surgery, this was the first time for me that I was experiencing it and I understood what was going on. And it did challenge my beliefs because what does an 8-year-old understand about life and death? And that's what I wrestled with at that age. And so I did think very seriously about these things and I was challenged. Um, I should probably say, full disclosure, my dad was a pastor. And so very quickly, whatever our family's beliefs were, I had to decide, is this something I'm going to choose for myself? Is this something hypothetical, or is this something that I'm going to embrace as my own? And that was the challenge, as much as an 8-year-old could understand these things.
Now, you stated that you were at peace when faced with serious surgery. Can you explain why to us?
I've likened it to a hurricane. It does tremendous damage, but as you get closer, I just found once I was in the eye of the storm and you're in the center of it, that the closer I got to that center, the more calm or peace I had. And the reason I believe for that is I've always assumed, number one, that there is a God. And number two, I've assumed that whatever I face in life, there is a purpose for it. Have that belief. I think what I went through would have been very difficult. Whether or not I was right, I believed God was with me. And number two, I believed that all these surgeries I was facing, there had to be a reason for it. And that gave me though I didn't like it, that did give me some peace in just knowing this is beyond my control, but there is a reason for it.
Yeah, I have faced those situations just like you, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. Same concept.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have faith. You know God's with you, and as you face it, you just put it put it in His hands.
Yeah.
There's nothing you can do. You can't control, what's going on around you. So you just have to, you have to do that. And I faced those situations a couple times, and it was just amazing. You're just peaceful.
Well, I've used this analogy too. If I got a bill for $3,000, I'd be wringing my hands. I'd be angry. I'd be saying, well, okay, how am I going to pay this? I got to move this fund over here because that's within my grasp. If I got a bill for $3 million, I'd go to bed and I wouldn't worry about it because it's so beyond what I can handle, beyond what I'm capable of fixing, that the disagree, we just have to let it go. And I've found with the things that I've faced, the smaller the problem, the more I tend to stress about it because I perceive it's in my control. If it's a huge problem that I have no control over, I actually find those easier to let go of.
Right. And what you said before, I always liken to the fact, instead of asking, why is it happening to me?
Mm-hmm.
Ask yourself, why is it happening for me? When
Yes,
you take that approach, it just softens everything up.
100%.
Yeah. Now talk to us about the collateral damage from the surgeries you faced. What was the collateral damage from all that?
So it's been interesting. When I had that surgery at 8 years old, the surgery went well. I recovered from it. But two things happened with that surgery. There was the tainted blood scandal in Canada at the time, and several patients in the hospital contracted HIV because of tainted blood on the same ward that I was on. So in the years subsequent to that, I had to be tested for AIDS just to make sure that I wasn't a carrier of that. And then with that surgery as well, I suffered a mini stroke at 8 years old, and I lost some of my short-term memory. So I've never been a fan of math since that because my multiplication table, which I had learned, I had to relearn. Things like ice skating that we do up in Canada, I forgot how to do that. So I had to relearn it. So there was this gap in my memory of probably several months that I just had to fill and then get back into normal life.
Has your memory come back since then?
Oh, that's a loaded question because a few surgeries later, I faced another challenge that really has affected me more so in
Okay.
that way.
All right, we'll talk about that. Now, in 1986,
Yes,
you moved to Bellevue, Ontario, and in 1989 to Ottawa.
yes,
So you're 14 years old, you needed an aortic valve replacement. Now, you chose a mechanical type, correct?
hmm,
And
correct.
and surgery was set for October 1990. Did you ever feel at that time like taking a victim mentality about all these heart issues you were having?
Yes, I did. Like I'd mentioned, between 1985 and 1990, I'd had 5 surgeries in 5 years. After that surgery at 8 years old, the surgery basically bought me a little bit of time.
Yeah.
In 1988, they did a ballooning procedure. That bought me another year. I had another catheterization, and that revealed you're going to need surgery. And so that surgery at 19 in 1990, that was a huge one because for much of my childhood, I felt like there was this storm cloud just hovering over me. And you'd have surgery, and you'd see a little bit of sun peeking through the clouds, but there were more clouds in the distance. And that surgery in 1990, I was 14 years old. 1990 was the year that Terminator 2 came out. And that's significant because that movie was about cyborgs. Well, I had this mechanical valve put in my heart, and now I was becoming a cyborg. I had
Yeah.
plastic parts that ticked like a watch. And to my young brain, this was the coolest thing ever. This was kind of the silver lining of everything bad that was happening.
Can you tell us a little bit about that operation? I mean, at that time it was a big thing.
This was a huge operation. They were going to repair the four chambers of my heart. They were going to scrape away previous scar tissue. My aortic valve was going to be removed, and they were going to put in a mechanical valve.
Right.
The challenge was uh, because I was growing, should they put in a child size valve? Should they put in an adult valve and hope that I grow into it? So they chose an adult valve. Um, they put it in, but that surgery was very touch and go. I almost died because once the surgery had been completed, I had internal bleeding that just would not stop. And there was talk that they might have to open me back up to get the bleeding to subside. Fortunately, I stabilized, the bleeding stopped. And Ron, I would really say at 14 years old with that surgery and recovering from that surgery, this was the first time in my life where the storm clouds were gone. I was healing and I could actually do things that other kids took for granted for years. It was a real turning point.
Well, that's wonderful. What are your thoughts on worry and fear?
We all worry and fear. However, they change nothing. There's a quote I love about worry. Worry is like a rocking chair. It gives you something to do, but doesn't get you anywhere.
Yeah.
And I find, you know, you can tell somebody not to worry, but it's something that they really have to adopt for themselves. And one thing that going through this many surgeries has taught me, you will never get a satisfactory answer to the why me question. Whatever you're facing, why did this happen to me? Why did I have these surgeries? I will never know. What I can get answers to, and again, this assumes that there's purpose in what we go through, I can say, what is this teaching me? So with every surgery, yes, I've had that initial thought, why did this have to happen? But then I thought, I'll never know. But I can say, okay, what can I learn in this surgery? What can and that's where there have been some very hard lessons, but very, very powerful lessons that have helped me along the way. That now, some 26, 30 years later, now I'm seeing here's why these things happen.
Answers that question for sure. Any tips for people out there pertaining to visiting people in the hospital? You were in the hospital so many times, and I'm sure you had a ton of visitors, family, friends, etc. For people out there listening to this, can you give us any tips
Yes,
about that?
I absolutely can. Keep your visits short. Don't go in for an hour. Um, go in for 10 minutes. Carry the conversation and then leave. I've had some people visit and they were there over an hour. And finally, at one point, I just said, "You're welcome to stay. I need to take a nap."
Yeah.
Because there's a
Like,
measure
I
where,
get the heck out of here. Another.
yeah, you're trying to be nice, but there's a measure where when you're sick, your world gets very small. You don't care about work. You don't care about your family. It's about managing pain in that moment and
Right.
surviving in that moment.
Yeah.
So when somebody comes, it's encouraging to see them. It's encouraging to have them there. But get in, say your piece, and then get out. My wife, she stayed with me a lot in the hospital, but it was just she would bring a book. She wouldn't even talk. I didn't
Yeah.
have to carry the conversation. She was just there as kind of a circulatory blanket for me.
Yeah. She was there for support.
Yeah.
Yeah. Understandable. Now, after the third surgery, you are okay until age 18. Now, you go on a quest for a black belt in martial arts. Can you talk about that?
Yeah.
I mean,
So
being a guy who's had all these operations, and here you are, in martial arts. That's
the
pretty
irony is not lost on
fascinating.
me. I remember as a kid from a hospital bed watching Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan and being completely captivated because they were magical. Like what they could do with their body was incredible. But there was always never do that. It was completely beyond me. Well, when I had that surgery at 14, suddenly my health drastically improved. Suddenly I could do little things like I could actually run. I could be physical. And there's a reason why I believe I gravitated to martial arts. About having agency, where I've been vulnerable for so much of my life. And now I'm going to take that vulnerability and do something proactive to protect myself. So, against my doctor's wishes, against my parents' better judgment, I begged and pleaded. I said, "Could I train? I won't do tournaments. I won't do full contact fighting, but could I just learn? Could I just start?" And it was a lot of arm twisting and very reluctant yeses. But I would say it's important, whatever you do, you have to risk responsibly. Everything we do has inherent risk to it. And I looked at the risks associated with this and I said, if I'm careful how I train, I think I can actually make my heart stronger over time.
Jennifer Lee, a podcast supporter of ours, has just had her book, Why I Survived, released. The book is a story and memoir of dealing with dating abuse, armed robbery, and abduction, and other forms of trauma. The book is dedicated to what is inside all of us: resilience, strength, courage, hope, perseverance, and love. Jennifer pulls us into her hair-raising traumatic stories and helps us understand the physical, emotional, and mental toll trauma takes on us. The book recalls four personal experiences of suspense, suspicion, and survival that ultimately leads to Jennifer's purpose of helping other survivors. Her book reminds us that we are not alone and encourages us to listen to our intuition to help us avoid pain and stay on the correct path. You will be on the edge of your seat once you read how Jennifer triumphs over her adversities and finds the gift of helping empower others to begin their healing journey by speaking her stories. You will simply not be able to put this book down after starting to read it. The reader will find words of support and knowledge you can use through Jennifer's experiences and resources throughout the book so you know that you are never alone. The book is available in paperback, Kindle, and audiobook formats through Amazon. Information on the book will be listed in the podcast notes.
And the irony now is that when I started getting into martial arts, my cardiologist, was shaking his head and I was showing him video clips like, this is what it is. They thought it was cage fighting. I said, it's not cage fighting. It's training. But as a result of doing that over time responsibly, it's actually made my heart stronger.
That's interesting because I guess what you're saying is the family, the doctors, they're looking out for you, but they're actually putting you in a wall.
Yeah.
You're surrounding you with a walls,
Yes.
four walls, and you want to live. You
Yeah.
want to get back to somewhat normalcy, right? And
Exactly.
what they're doing is they're doing the right thing in their mind, but I hear where you're coming from. You got to knock those walls down, or else you're always going to be, like Danny, it's icy outside. Maybe you better stay home. I mean,
Exactly.
probably life would have been like that, I would imagine.
And it's no different than what anyone else does. Can you run 10 miles? You don't know until you try. And you conk out at mile 8 and you realize there's my limit. And so for me, it was the same thing. I'm going to really push my limits and just see where are they. And I think whether it's me or anyone else, you will be absolutely astounded at where your limits are if you just actually try stepping out of that comfort zone.
Right. Now, along the way, I understand you had a mishap, a pharmacy mishap with Coumadin,
Yes.
which is a blood thinner. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So I was in my mid to late 30s. I was doing martial arts and I was doing it responsibly. But I noticed I had a lot of bruises all over my body. And initially I attributed those bruises to just overtraining. Well, a couple days later, I counted and I had 17 bruises. And I thought, that's really odd. Well, then I was taking my medication and noticed that the colors were wrong. And the long story short, the pharmacy had mislabeled the dosage, and that for over a month, I had been taking a double dose of blood thinner, which essentially meant my blood was so watered down
Yeah.
that the least little thing caused bruising.
Oh, sure.
So that mishap triggered a series of events where my cardiologist said, stop everything you're doing, get to the hospital, we'll get you some vitamin K shots, we'll regulate your blood. And then it triggered a number of testing. Well, let's check, let's do an ECG, let's do a CT scan. And all that testing revealed, unbeknownst to me, that my aortic arch had drastically enlarged and was at risk of bursting. So
So we're
that
talking about an aneurysm.
we are 100% talking about an aneurysm.
Okay.
And so that seemingly fluke mistake actually uncovered a huge problem. And
Yeah.
this is why I say you don't always know why things happen. But man, I can see if I had not had that happen, I would have been testing for another belt and that aortic would have burst.
Yeah.
And it would have come as a shock to everybody.
Yeah. It would have been over for sure.
Yeah.
Wow. So that was the first surgery you had after 26 years of good health. Is that correct?
26 years. And I remember I always say this with medicine, no news is good news.
Yeah.
So I got a call saying, okay, you're scheduled cardiologist in 3 months. And 2 days later, they called back to say, we need you to come in. And I hung up the phone and I looked and I said, this is not good news. And sure enough, they said, you need surgery and we're going to have to repair the arch. And what was really neat is they were going to replace the mechanical valve that had been put in years before. And I was supposed to get one solid plastic piece that was, it would have been the Cadillac of heart replacement technology.
Now, I understand when you had that, I think it was an 8-hour surgery, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
You went 9 minutes with no blood or oxygen. Is that correct?
That's correct. So I remember it. As we got closer to the surgery date, my wife and I slept all night. We got up early that morning, went to the hospital. I was calm. I was joking with the anesthesiologists. But when I was put to sleep and they opened me up, at some point, and they can't say exactly when, my aorta had ruptured.
Okay.
And so that procedure turned into an emergency operation to save my life. And it meant that for 9 minutes, no blood, no oxygen going to my brain, going to my body. And it was a literal fight to save my life. And I know people throw around the word miracle a lot, but humanly speaking, I should not be sitting here having this conversation with you.
Yeah. Well, we're glad you are around for sure. Uh, that's just unbelievable. 9 minutes with no blood or oxygen.
Mm-hmm.
That's, yeah. Tell us about your concept of suffering, because I think you went through a lot of suffering with all these operations. What's your concept of suffering for people out there?
So, two things. The first thing that comes to my mind is there's a quote by Richard Paul Evans that says, "Usually, life's greatest gifts come wrapped in adversity." And so, I kind of alluded to it earlier. What has helped me struggle and accept the suffering that I've faced is just assuming or acting like there's a purpose for it, there's a reason for it.
Okay.
It's not just accidental, that it's not just, you know, this person over here has life so great, I've got it so terrible, but there's a reason why things are different. And I've just accepted, I maybe it's a coping mechanism, but I've just accepted whatever difficulties have come into my life. There's a reason for them. And there's something that I will learn from this that will help me grow. And this really hit me when I was challenged to write a book. And my book, Scar Tissue, really came about when I came across a quote. And the quote is, "One day you will tell your story of how you've overcome what you're going through now, and it will become part of someone else's survival guide."
Yeah, I've heard that quote.
That epitomized everything that I've gone through in the past. If I can survive it and thrive from it, then that means there's going to be somebody in my life 10 years from now or 20 years from now that needs to hear how I got through it.
Right. I
And again,
love
that
that. I love that because you're an advocate, whether you
mhm.
know it or not. You're an advocate. And you're helping people and people can take this. They're listening to this. There's got to be people out there listening to this that are having their issues. And I think they can take solace in what you're saying.
I think so. And it was interesting. A friend of mine was getting married and he wanted me to meet one of his groomsmen. And this poor guy, Ron, he'd been through cancer, he had had eye surgery, knee surgery. He had been through so many things. And my friend thought if the two of us can get talking, maybe, we have similar backgrounds. But it was actually one of the hardest conversations I had because this guy was bitter. I didn't deserve to have this happen. I don't know why this is happening to me. It could have been, should have been someone else. And I'm looking at, the things that I've gone through and saying, well, man, I feel like there's a reason I go through this. There's a reason why all these difficult things can allow me to help others. And
Yeah.
just in the past month, I've talked to other people that are going through heart surgery, that have been through heart surgery, whose families are going through it. And they are looking at me saying, "You are the first person that understands this. That's why you go through suffering."
Absolutely. What do you say to people who tend to ask recovering patients if they're back to normal? How do you answer that? Because I get that a lot all the time.
You don't go back to normal. Um, the pandemic's kind of, hijacked that term new normal. But I say when you go through something difficult, you will have a better than normal. Meaning, I'm not the same guy I was 8 years ago. I have deeply changed. I've become more thoughtful and pensive. I've had different challenges. Since that surgery, I forget things, as you know.
Yeah.
Um, I find multitasking very difficult, but I know there's a rhyme and reason for it. I know if I can navigate these challenges well, it'll help someone else. So I've just chosen to look at whatever we face, whatever I face. And this is something you have to decide for yourself. You can't tell somebody, "Hey, just change your attitude and everything will be better." They have to adopt that no matter what they face, they're not a victim. You may be victimized, but it's up to you whether you choose to be a victim.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree. And hopefully somebody in that negative situation can listen to you and say, you know what? Maybe I'm looking at this the wrong way. that light bulb may go off. So let's hope so. Talk
Mhm.
to us about POCD, post-operative cognitive disorder, and can it resolve?
So this was the silent challenge that I was faced with that I didn't even know. I'd had my last surgery. I was recovering just fine as far as I was concerned. When I started going off my pain medications, and I'm starting to get some of my full cognition back. That's when I realized I'm forgetting things, or I'll ask my wife to explain something, and I don't understand what she's saying. I can't process it. And it got really acute when I would go walking around my neighborhood. And in the first few weeks after surgery, I got lost in my own neighborhood. I've lived here for 10 years, and
Yeah,
I got lost. Or I would drive to work and I'd be driving down the wrong road. And where am I? How did I get here? And initially that was very alarming to me. I would get frustrated. I cannot tell you how many times I've lost my keys, or if I leave the house, my wife knows I'll come back in 3 times. I forgot this, I forgot that.
yeah,
And that initially that's very frustrating. But what I've tried to do now is just, instead of letting it ruin my day, just say, well, I forgot. There it is. This is part of my better than normal. How am I going to handle this? And just accept it and then be thankful. Hey, yes, I lost my keys, but I can still drive and my functions are all there. So it's just trying to find a little tiny things that you can still be grateful for. I'm thankful that despite these challenges, I can still work, I can still do podcasts, I can still write.
yeah.
So it's just the small things to be grateful for. But that was one that was very challenging and just completely left field.
Now, you also, I believe, went through a period of survivor's guilt. Can you
Yes.
talk to us about this and what conclusions did you arrive at?
Yeah, especially when I was in high school and deciding what to do for college, I just felt this tremendous pull to medicine, almost like I'd been saved so many times in difficult surgeries that I almost owed it back to become a doctor. And, from a story point of view, heart patient becomes doctor and saves lives. I just thought, well, I need to give back in some way. And there have been other patients that I've known along the way that you pray for them, you hope for them, and they pass away. And there were a number of people in my life that fought cancer, they fought heart surgery, and they passed away. And that just created this huge guilt that why did they die? Why did I live? It doesn't make sense. They didn't deserve that. There's nothing special about me that I deserve to live. So I really wrestled with that. And there's a word in the Old Testament that talks about life being vanity or life being meaningless. And the Hebrew word is hevel, which means unknowable, an enigma. So it's not just that it's meaningless, it's just we cannot meaning of things. And when I started wrestling with that I don't know why. I will get a satisfactory answer to that why question. But I had a good friend of mine say to me, you're here simply because God is not done with you yet.
Good
And if
answer.
I
Good
and
answer.
when I accepted that, it's nothing to do with me. It's everything to do with, okay, if that's true, then I got work to do.
Yeah.
And the other thing that hit me is some of those people that I've come alongside and sat by their bed and they passed away. I've come to realize my job or my role was not to save them, but maybe it was to give them comfort, or maybe it was to give them help or hope in the struggles that they face. And what's wrong with that?
Nothing. Nothing.
Nothing.
No.
So it's taken me a long time to kind of think through and work through it. But I think the answer to survivor's guilt is Give people hope who are suffering because you can. It's that simple.
Yeah. What have 8 heart surgeries taught you?
Don't give up. Number one, it's taught me, uh, how can I say this? I think having faith is can sometimes look like stubbornness, meaning I believed that I was going to get healed and get better. So that meant I was very rigid and stubborn about doing the things that would help me do that. That means that I've learned that many people will be your cheerleaders and they'll encourage you to play it safe because they're rightly concerned about you. But you have to push safely. My dad, I had received my brown belt, which is one belt away from black. And he says, "That's good enough. You've had all these surgeries. You should just take it easy now." And I said, "Dad, I'm almost there." And this may sound strange, Ron, but I've tried to look at life in terms of story. So if your life was a story and you're facing a particular challenge and you're writing this, what would you want that character to do?
The podcast guest and author, Marcia Moran, has written an incredible read titled Stroke Forward: How to Become Your Own Healthcare Advocate, One Step at a Time. On March 30th, 2014, Marcia's whole world changed as she suffered a stroke at age 53. If you are someone who is a patient with a serious brain injury looking for hope and insights into ways to keep moving forward, or a family member or friend who has been thrust into the role of guarding over someone with a brain injury, you will discover that you are not alone in your quest to be the best caregiver you can be. The book is stroke specific, but the author's advice has many applications with added perspectives included in the text of the book from healthcare providers, Marcia herself, Marcia's husband, and friends. The book is more than just a book about stroke or victims of it. It is a story of bravery, love, and resilience. Holding a master's in business administration, Marcia has written over 50 business plans and created value by strategizing how companies could remain relevant as the world changed around them. When her stroke turned her world upside down, she applied her planning and strategy skills to become whole. Her journey of learning to become her own healthcare advocate, one step at a time, is shared in the book and will benefit everyone reading the book trying to navigate the healthcare complex. This book is a rare combination of intimate personal experience, medical education, and practical advice. The book is available from Amazon in paperback and ebook formats. Information on the book will be listed in the podcast notes.
Would you want them to give up when things got difficult?
Succeed, succeed.
Exactly. So we read these stories, we're protagonists, but then when it comes to us, well, I'm going to play it safe. I don't want to rock the boat. When I think about my life in terms of a story, that changes it because no, it's going to be difficult, but do the hard work. Put in the time, invest it, visit that person who needs encouragement because that's a good story.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better. Now, I am sure this is kind of an interesting question for you. I'm sure people ask you, since you've had so many of these surgeries,
Mm-hmm.
have you had any near-death experiences? And how do you answer these questions? Because I'm sure that must have came up.
It has come up, and I feel like if anybody should have had one, I should have. Um, I haven't in the classic sense of the term. I've read up a lot about NDEs and near death experiences. The closest I had was a surgery where the anesthesiologist, as I understand it, they regulate how unconscious you are,
Yeah.
And during one of my surgeries, I could hear the surgeons talking and I could feel picking at my chest. It wasn't painful, but I remembered that. And at the time, they said, "No, no, no, that's impossible." Well, I've read up on it since. Uh, I wouldn't say that's a near death experience, but um, I'll keep you posted if that changes.
Okay.
But
All right.
I to date, no. But I thought, man, if anybody should have had one, I should have one. I should have
So
a
you,
great
so you didn't
story.
rise above and look down on them or none of that stuff. Okay.
Not yet, but
Okay. Well,
hopefully, no
hopefully you
more
don't.
surgeries.
Hopefully you won't. No more surgeries. Yeah. What was the spark that made you write Scar Tissue? And what do you hope the reader takes away from reading the book? Which was a great book, by the way.
Oh, thank you. It's actually a sad story, but a friend of mine, he and his wife lost a baby, and he's an artist, and he wanted to write a children's book, and just the book was basically a way for him to process his grief. So he asked me, he said, "Can you and I go for a walk? And I just want to bounce some ideas off of you for my book." So we went to this beautiful forest near my house. We walked for about 2 hours. Towards the end of our walk, he turned to me and he asked me, he said, "Would you ever write a book?" And I said, "No, I'm not. Number one, I'm too young." And I just said, "Well, what would I have to say?" But there's a I think we don't get ideas. Ideas get us. They grab us. And that idea of his words, "Would you ever write a book?" They kind of caught me and they stuck with me. So, sometime later, I said, "Well, I'm just going to jot down some notes." And I had about 12 pages of notes after a couple hours. And then I started to realize, well, maybe I do have something to say. And at that point, I got really excited and then I got terrified. And usually for me, when something scares me, that's kind of the nudge that tells me you need to do this. Whatever this is scaring you, this is outside your comfort zone and you need to do it. And so it kind of hit me, you need to write a book. And I didn't know the first thing about writing a book, but I spent months just organizing what it would look like, how it would flow. And then January 2021, I started writing and I spent most of the year. I worked full time and keep busy with my family. So I wrote when I had time. And the book just came together. There were so many times along the way, it just seemed like an impossibility trying to find a publisher, trying to find an editor, and then so many challenges along the way. But I am thrilled that this book has not only been printed, but now it's in its second edition and it's reaching people and it's making a difference.
I never like to interject myself into these podcasts because it's not about me, it's about you. But that's kind of how this podcast was formulated. I was doing, and I still do, advocacy work for male breast cancer happens.org.
Mhm.
And I told the director, I said, we have to stop preaching to the choir. We have to get out there and tell people who don't know anything about this. So let's go on some podcasts. So we
Mhm.
started going on podcasts all over the world, England, New Zealand, Australia, US, Canada. And somebody said to me, "Well, you have a somewhat decent voice. Why don't why don't you start a podcast of your own?" And I said, "No, come on. Just like you said with the book,
Mhm.
no, I wouldn't want to do that." And then I thought about it and I said, "Well, maybe I should give it a shot." So I bought a microphone, I bought headsets, and that's how I started. Just
Wow.
like you did. I didn't know the first thing about this at all,
Mhm.
but I gave it a shot and here we are.
So the idea had you.
Yeah, exactly. Just
Yeah.
just like you said. Uh, you also co-authored a book titled Remarkable People, Volume One. Can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, Remarkable People is a podcast that my friend started. And years ago, he asked me to be on it. And Ron, I had no idea what I was going to say. I winged it. I feel like I did a terrible job. However, he thought it was adequate enough that he cobbled together a book where he took different significant guests from his show, and he had each of us write a chapter on a different area of our quote unquote expertise or things that we had lived through. And so I contributed a chapter about perspective. And the angle that I focused in on is, is the glass half full or is it half empty? And we get so fixated on that when really we've got a glass of water and we can be thankful for the water.
Yeah,
And that was just the angle that I came at. But his book did well, and I it was exciting. It was the first time I'd ever written, and this was I was actually writing my own story at the time, so this was a nice little detour for a few weeks.
sure.
Yeah.
That's cool. Uh, Danny, for those out there in the audience struggling with overcoming their issues, what advice do you have for them?
Do not give up. Do not give up. And do not give up. I don't believe in, you know, just being positive for the sake of positive. I would say if you're really struggling and you're hearing this, as much as you want to ask it, don't ask why. What I would say instead is start asking what. I'm going through this horrible disease. I'm going through this horrible breakup. My finances are ruined. My heart is bad. What can I learn in this? And there was something I read that really impacted me. So 2017 was the year I had open heart surgery and nearly died. But if I had to write something about that year, it's not I had surgery, I almost died, and it was a terrible year. Is you summarize what you've learned from the difficult circumstance, not summarize the difficult circumstance. So for me, 2017 was the year I learned to value my health. 2017 was the year I learned my suffering is not just about me. And I think that's a huge part of it too. Whatever somebody is facing that's hearing this, you are in pain, your world is small, it's about you in the moment and it hurts. But someday there will be somebody else in that exact same spot, and you will be able to come alongside them, put your arm around them, and say, I understand, and I'm here, and I can help. And
Very
that's
well,
probably as simple as I can say it.
very well said. Danny, how can people contact you and where is your book, Scar Tissue, available?
So my website, it's dannycovey.com. That's DANNYCOVEY.com. My book is available through my website, or if you visit amazon.com.ca, my book is there. I'm very easy to find on social media. I have a monthly newsletter that I put out that people can subscribe to if they wish. So just if you're on Facebook or LinkedIn or Instagram, just type in my name and you'll see my little head poking up, and there I am.
Okay, so just at Danny
Yeah.
Covey. Okay.
Yeah.
Uh, Danny, I want to thank you for being a guest on the podcast, sharing your story and your deepest thoughts on life issues that we discussed. I wish you and your family good health, and I know you are a walker, and I'm a walker as well. I used to be a runner, but I'm not anymore. And I hope one day to take a walk with you.
I would absolutely love that. And
Well,
I hope to see
I
you
was up
soon.
in Quebec uh, a couple months ago, so hopefully we'll get up to Toronto or Ontario where you are.
Mhm.
Uh, anyway, I do, like I said, wanna wish you you and the family all the best, and God bless you. And thanks
All right.
again for being on.
Thank you, Ron, so much.
It was awesome. Comments and suggestions for the podcast. You can email me at it's a wrap with rap at gmail.com. Our website is it's a wrap with rap.com. Our Facebook group, we have about 2,000 people in it. It's a wrap with rap. Instagram is at It's a Rap with Rap Podcast, and we're on X at Rapper, WRAPPER 130. All the episodes are on the YouTube channel. It's a Rap with Rap, the podcast uncut. I want to thank everyone for listening or viewing. Please stay safe out there. And for now, it's a wrap.